Croeso, welcome. If we're just letting people into the room at the moment, if you just want to pop your who you are and where you're from in the chat, it'd be great to see who's here today. Brilliant. We've only got half an hour set aside for these lunch and learns, so we will start. So, Prynhawn da, Croeso, good afternoon, and welcome to the Centre for Digital Public Services Lunch and Learn session, How to Do Pair and Trio Writing. Very timely for this week as the National Eisteddfod is taking place right now. This is the third in our fourth part summer series for Lunch and Learns, which has a focus on user-centered design. To catch up on previous recordings, please visit our YouTube channel and look for our Lunch and Learn playlist. I think my colleague Elise is going to pop a link into the chat there. So you won't, if you do miss a session, don't worry. We've got a great playlist where you can catch up in those recordings in your own time. We will be recording today's session and adding this to our playlist. So please turn off your cameras and microphones if you don't want to be seen or heard. And today's session will be delivered by our content designer at the Centre for Digital Public Services, or we refer to ourselves as the CDPS, Adrian Ortega. So I will now pass you over to Adrian.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, everyone. Can I check that you can see my screen? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm Adrian Ortega. I'm a content designer at CDPS, as Mike said. And to start with, if you're not familiar with content design, it's basically about communicating information in the best way possible. It's about using design thinking to deliver usable and useful information. For this, we understand how users find, interact with, and use information, and what information they need and when. So basically, it's about providing the right information to the right person at the right time and in the right format. So it's clear, accessible, and actionable. It's also findable, accessible, and inclusive, easy to understand and act on. But at the same time, it's not just about the information itself, it's about creating systems or designing systems in your organization to deliver, manage, measure, and maintain this content. Quite often it's about deleting lots of content as well. So today, this is the agenda for the day. This is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to go through what is pair and trio writing, what are the benefits of working this way and working together, how to do it, and some things for your consideration if you want to try doing this. So what's pair and trio writing? Basically, pair writing is a technique to collaborate in the production of content. It's about two people sitting to write together. And trio writing adds an extra person. And you can do this remotely, or you can do it in the same room, but just bear in mind that I'm going to be thinking about doing it remotely. It should be fairly straightforward to adapt it to meet your needs and do it in the same room. So pair writing, as I said, it's about sitting together, two people, usually a subject matter expert and a content person. While trio writing includes, in our case, we normally talk about including a translator. In my experience, it's not a good idea to include more people in the writing process because it becomes harder and harder to collaborate effectively. That's why we do 2 and 3 people. Subject matter experts in pair writing brings to the table the expertise and the knowledge. They make sure that the information is factual and correct. Sometimes you can use a user researcher if they have a good understanding of the topic and the user needs as well. Then we have the content person. I call it a content person because the the role name is not standardized yet, particularly in the Welsh public sector. So you might find a content designer like me, or you can find a content officer, a web manager, or even a comms officer in some places. That's why I use a general content person. Ideally, they will bring to the table the knowledge of how the website content fits in together, and also principles of writing for the web, how to communicate in a user-friendly way, and also the advocacy for the users and their needs. It's important to have these two people in the same room because of a cognitive bias, or for many reasons, but one of them is a cognitive bias called the cost of knowledge or the cost of expertise, which basically is the assumptions that we all make quite often about how other people have a similar background and the depth of knowledge that we have to understand the same thing that we do. Or as Caroline Jarrett, who's a content consultant and forms and survey specialist, say, we cannot judge if something is both clear and correct. If we know it well enough to say if it's correct, we know it too well to say if it's clear. Then, apart from these two people, in thriawd writing, we will include a translator who makes sure that both languages are equally considered. So the goal of including a translator is that we, in Welsh public sector, that we can produce a piece of content bilingually at the same time, considering both languages. So what are the benefits of working this way, of collaborating with pair or thriawd writing? So I think that working together this way reduces mistakes and revisions. It saves us times in the back and forth of emails and calls for clarification. It also prevents us from investing time and effort into creating just-in-case content that's not necessary. At the same time, increases collaboration and engagement. It promotes empathy and understanding of not just with our users, but also for our colleagues, because we start to understand and appreciate better the different skills and expertise that are necessary to produce content, and also why decisions around content are made. And at the same time, increases the content that we produce that meet user needs and are based on user research. In general, we can say that working this way creates better content, more user-centered, content that meets user needs better, that is in the right voice, tone, and language of the website and the brand. And also content that is clear and easy to understand and act on. It improves as well the feedback and iteration processes, and it's better use of everyone's time. As I said before, it saves revisions and confusions and frustration. Specifically about the thriawd writing, it does not only give the translator a more active role, where they can understand the context of the piece of content, of the information that we are producing. They can ask questions for clarity. And in that way, we make sure that both languages are as clear and as natural as each other, as they are both equally considered. We can say that Welsh is not treated any less favorably to English, which is what the law requires as well. It produces better content in both languages, which means better services in the language that your users want to use it. So now I'm gonna talk a bit about how we do this. As I said before, it depends. Well, you can adapt this to your specific needs and circumstances, but generally I split it in 4 different stages, which are planning and preparing, getting on the same page or alignment, writing, and getting feedback. The first step is to plan and prepare everything you need for the session. As I say, it depends on what you need and your circumstances. But things that you want to prepare beforehand are from finding the right person to invite to the session, to doing your research or collecting user research insights, putting them together into user stories and acceptance criteria. We're gonna see now what these are. In terms of finding the right person, the goal of working this way is to save time and work for everyone. So it's important to try and find someone who's got sign-off authority over the content. So you don't want, at the end of producing the piece of content, you don't want to include to realize that you need to include more people for feedback before publishing the content. This is not always possible, but it will save you time and work. in the end, if you can find someone who can green light the content, the best. Also, you're going to be working on a document together. So you want to create that document that you can share and add to it any relevant information, like the user research that you might have, those user stories and acceptance criteria. You can use Google Docs, but Word document in SharePoint works as well. The point is that you can have a chat and work together on the same document. If a translator is coming to the session, you might want to also split the page on double columns so you can be working on 2 languages at the same time. So as I say, if you're not familiar with a user story, this is the form that it takes. The user story helps us it puts into words the needs of the users, but also help us focus on them. It's something to have. It gives you something to refer back to when you cannot see the forest for the trees anymore in the conversation. You need to carry on coming back to this. This normally comes from research, otherwise it's going to be based on your assumptions. After having user stories, we normally put them into acceptance criteria that gives you a success metric, or I guess a benchmark to assess your work. These are written from the perspective of the user, and they tell you what the user needs to know and how they need to feel, or what they need to be able to do after reading your content. As I said before, this should be coming from user research rather than assumptions. You need to bear in mind that user needs can change with time too, and that you need to test this content with your users. So after the preparing and the planning, I wanted to talk about alignment with the people involved in the session. Getting on the same page. This is something that you probably want to do before the session itself. You want to meet the person that is going to be working with you. You want to introduce yourself and the project, and it's an opportunity to explain not just the work and but also why the help is so important. You can tell them how the session will run and why, what the users of this information are and their needs, and also what is each one's roles in the session. So it's an opportunity to start creating a shared understanding of this work and make sure that everyone knows their role in the process. You can follow this up with an email to summarize and document all this information. Is something to refer back to as well. And if you are inviting a translator in the session, you can do the same. You meet them beforehand to explain why you want to try this way of working, and also discuss your approach. You want to encourage the translation to ask all the questions they need and challenge your writing, because the point is to make sure that the content that you produce is as clear and natural as possible. And sometimes it won't work when you translate, so you want to have this back and forth between both of you. Once that you go in the session, you want to repeat all this. You want to make emphasis on everyone's role and that you're working together, bringing to the table different skills and expertise, which are equally important. Then we start by discussing the user research insights, the user stories and acceptance criteria, and then we get on with the writing. The first thing that I would do to start writing is to prioritize these user stories and acceptance criteria. The user story, basically, because if you discuss it and you prioritize it and sort it out by importance, it gives you a rough structure of what the piece is gonna be. You want the most important information from the user perspective to be higher in the piece of content. Then you can start thinking about turning this into headings. For example, how much is a grant? In this case, we're talking about a grant. From that, this acceptance criteria, you can think of how much is a grant, eligibility, apply, contact us, and you start discussing these headings. After that, you want to start basically chatting, discussing, and filling the gaps with the relevant information. Ask questions, as many questions as possible until everything is as clear as possible and you are sure that you're meeting the user needs. Sometimes you want to, or you may want the subject matter expert to write down the thoughts and then you can edit them for clarity and simplicity. And again, as I said earlier, if there's a translator in the room, they will be asking questions as well to have a clear idea of what you're trying to communicate. And there will be some back and forth between both languages as some things cannot be clearly translated. After that, you will just carry on editing, cutting out what's not relevant to make it as simple and straightforward as possible. My advice is not to add more and more information. This is something that you want to go back to the acceptance criteria, and any extra information that you still think that is quite important, maybe take a note and put it aside because it might give you ideas for other content that's needed. Carry on going back to the user stories and the acceptance criteria to anchor you to what's relevant for this piece of content specifically, at least. And finally, getting feedback. So before completing the session, you want to go back to the acceptance criteria and make sure that you are ticking off all the criteria that makes this piece of content successful. There might be some questions that you left unanswered, the same as the information that you think that is important but not relevant to this piece particularly. You want to take note of those. Maybe there's no clear-cut answer. Maybe there's something that you need to fact check or double check with other people. So you might want to get feedback from external people. Just even though I said that this way of working is about saving time, this is not the end of the process. So probably you will need some more editing and more revisions. You want to test this with actual users, and that will bring more insights about if it's working or what's not working or what's not. In that sense, you want to ask for feedback as well to the people who took part in the session with you to understand better what worked and what not. And you want to update the participants on the next steps. Am I doing with time? Okay. So I thought about a couple of things to consider in terms of, I guess in terms of challenges that you might find trying this in your organization. So these are all interconnected in a way. If you're trying to do this in your organization, I understand that the organizations are not necessarily set up for this way of working. So there might be a lot of explaining on your part of why this is important, as well as how users interact and use your content, as well as your content and services online. Especially if the content production model in your organization is typical, where the different services develop their content and then request to get it published without any type of design input in the process. Also, if you want to include a translator, for example, in the process, and the bilingual team works in a siloed way, where translations are thought at the end of the process. Something that's also challenging is when the information that you're trying to produce in a clear way is not, or you're trying to communicate some information in a clear way, but the service that you're talking about is not designed, but let happen over the years. It's hard to communicate with clarity something that's not clear itself. So that's not up to you really, and it can be a bit frustrating. So some advice I will give you, just to finish here, some advice I will give you is to start small, try to pilot this with people in the organizations, show its value. Hopefully in the meantime, while you try this, you will find champions and people who want to advocate for it to others. And arm yourself with resources and evidence and just chip away slowly. So that's it for me about trio writing. I don't know, before going to questions, if you want to talk about this, we have at CDPS 2 community of practice, a content design one, and the building bilingual services that you can join. The content design community of practice specifically, we meet once a month, apart from September because of summer break, and we use Basecamp to stay in touch regularly. It's quite early days, so you have an opportunity to shape the future of this community with us. So you're very welcome to join us. And I'm not sure if anyone has any questions about any of this. I'm happy to discuss.
Diolch yn fawr, Adrian. Does anyone have any questions? Want to raise their hand or post something into the chat there? Great, Adrian. Well, I could see I had a reminder on your popped up there that you've got lunch in 9 minutes. So we'll keep this to 9 minutes, this end bit. So if there's no more questions, what I do want to say is that Adrian has done some great stuff working in the open on this stuff, some projects that we've been doing and been blogging about it. Some of the work that we've been doing with the cost of living crisis here in Wales, working with the local government. So yeah, we definitely put some links into the chat there around some of the blogs that Adrian's been discussing this. And also, yeah, like I said, encourage you to get in touch if you haven't already done so with our communities of practice. Before you go, we would like people to just do a quick check-in to see how they felt that today's session went, the learnings they've taken from today's session with our mentee. So if people do want to log on, it's menti.com and you enter the code 11456754. You can also use the QR code there on screen. And we just wanted quickly to go through, you know, a quick scale, really. How much do you agree with the following statements? Did today's lunch and learn make sense to you? Did you learn something new today? What we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve here. I would like to start trying this technique in my own organization. Be really interested to just gauge what the sort of the motivation is and will for people out there to start trying out this technique. As Adrian said, it doesn't mean you might not be set up for this yet, but just the motivation and will would be great to get a sense of. And if you still have questions, you know, this is something which is a relatively new concept to many. So there's still going to be plenty of questions out there. So we'd be interested to know if you still have questions. And obviously we can pick up with those with you post-event. And on the second question after this one is a free box form. What is your main takeaway for today's session? We always try with our lunch and learns for there to be a real takeaway that you can take and you can start to take it back to your own organization. So what is your main takeaway for today's session? And just with some very exciting news now, as this week is National Eisteddfod, we just want to let you know about an event that we are running, an in-person event on Thursday. We will be launching our book on trio writing at this week's National Eisteddfod. So we will be giving a demonstration of how this process works and hear first-hand experiences from the Welsh public sector about how they've been putting this into practice. We're going to be joined by Natural Resources Wales, which is great. I don't know if there's anyone from Natural Resources Wales in the room here today. We're also going to be joined by Jeremy Miles, Minister for Education and Welsh Language. And plan is we're going to be giving away 50 hard copies of the book at the event, but there also is going to be an e-version of the book to be following later this month. So if you're at this week's Eisteddfod, please come and find us at the Welsh Government tent on the Maes D. And also, if you're not going to make it, don't worry. You can also make sure you are first to receive an email on the free e-version of the book by signing up to our mailing list. So I think my colleague Elise is going to be popping a message into the chats with a link to our mailing list, and you'll be first to receive a sort of link to that book. Just before I move on, looks like we've got a question just come in, Adrian, from Nia. I don't know if Nia wants to come in here. Do you want, Nia, shall I bring you in? Do you want to just unmute you and you want to come and ask this question?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
We can hear you, Nia. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, I was just thinking about, you mentioned that it helps to find somebody who can actually sign off the contents. Do you think it would work to invite them to the session as well as the subject expert and the translator?
So having 4 people, then as I said before, I think that the more people you have, the more input you'll need to balance. So it makes it harder. I'm assuming that the person who can sign off the content and the subject matter expert are different. So would the person who can sign it off not be a subject matter expert as well? You know what I mean? Maybe that's the best person to work with then.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking of it from the perspective of having, maybe somebody who's a sort of specialist in a topic, and then you might have like I don't know, like a content manager who has to sort of okay all the content. Yeah, but I take your point that it could be too many people.
Definitely worth consideration. Thanks, Nia. That's great. Brilliant. Is there any other questions that have going in there? I think Edwina's just put in their chats just a message to Lloyd saying the work that the team did with the local authorities, Welsh Government around content for the cost of living crisis. Yeah, translator was external. Yeah, and there's a chapter in the book about their perspective. So yeah, we're happy to have a chat through what we've done there. That's for sure. Brilliant. So what I was going to say before we close, and thanks for everyone. For your time today. We have got a sort of a final part in this summer series, which is another Lunch and Learn, which is going to be on how to ask users the right questions. So this is going to be with our user research experts within the Centre for Digital Public Services, Jana and Gabby. And we do actually have Jana here today, who I was just going to be bringing in quickly just to tell people a little bit more about this session. And we've got a link in the chat for people to sign up to that as well. So Jana, you there?
I am, yes, doing the classic old mute thing. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so our session on the 21st of August with myself and Gabby, we're going to be talking about crafting the right kind of user research questions. It can be quite daunting when you go into a user interview. You've got your kind of research questions, you kind of know what you want to know, but how do you ask those of a user, and how do you get the right answers out of people so that you don't end up wasting time doing an interview that you don't gain anything from? So what we're trying to put together is a bit of a practical lunch and learn to give you some practical tips on how to ask users the right questions, the kind of things you want to do to prepare for a user interview. So yeah, it's not just for user researchers, it's for anyone that wants to dip their toe in sort of talking to their users, and hopefully give you some practical advice. So yeah, looking forward to seeing people there. I know they might all be on holiday, but yeah, I'm really excited about doing that.
Fab, that's great. And I think we've already got over 50 signed up for that event already.
Oh, amazing.
So it looks like there's a lot of interest in that subject already. So that'll be brilliant. Yeah, so join us in 2 weeks' time for that last edition in our summer series. We will be following up with you following this event with all the sort of the links that we shared today and a link to the recording. And so I will look. It looks like there's 1 minute left on Adrian's notification on screen there. So for lunch, so we will make sure we are on time for Adrian's lunch. So we will finish things off there. So Diolch and Val, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. And if we see you at Eisteddfod on Thursday, that'll be great. All right. All the best.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.